Our next garden tour stop is sponsored by Salina Regional Health Center and Davidson Tree Farm, and is at the home of Angie and Rick Frisbee. Angie is a new Master Gardener in the last year, so we are both wearing our Master Gardener t-shirts today. We're calling the Frisbee's Garden the Meandering Sanctuary. And we thank you and your husband, Rick, for allowing us to visit your beautiful garden today.
My pleasure.
Before we start the tour, we just want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things, get to know you better as a gardener. How long have you been working on and designing your garden here?
We moved here 6 years ago, so that's when we started the garden. Actually, the meandering is my husband's idea. In the back, you'll see more. We tore out a lot of grass, and so all that is garden. That garden area is new.
So we'll get to see lots of meandering.
Right.
How do you describe your gardening style?
I would say free form.
And what inspires you?
Oh, well, I think it started when I grew up on the farm and helping Mom and Dad in the garden, and bringing my mom flowers and putting them in a vase. And I worked a little bit in a florist shop arranging, so I had just, color and beauty is just, I try to create that because I love beauty, and so I like to create it for others.
What are some of your favorite flowers here?
I love tulips, and I think part of that is coming out of the winter months, and the cheery daffodils and tulips, and it's just it's a welcoming sign to me.
Well, we're going to let you take us around your yard and your garden and show us a few of your favorite things. So let's start right here. Okay. So on our left here are the brilliant, stunning red cone flowers. Tell us about those.
Those were planted a year ago, and they have since really blossomed out and increased in size, and they're some of my favorite
And you
plants.
said the color.
And
was
I
important.
chose color red because of our red roof and the stucco on our house, and so I've tried to incorporate a lot of red and then splashes of yellow, and some of these plants were here.
Over to the right,
Oh, to the right is phlox.
the tall phlox with
And the white flower in front of you to the right.
by the tree. What is this tree right here, Angie?
That's river birch, and that was planted when we first got here. We had no trees but two, and they are in the back, a big willow tree and a oak tree. So,
I love the bark.
oh, the violets.
Along the sidewalk here, we
Right
have.
here, I've planted them to make sort of a border, and I know I'll have to keep my eye on them because they spread very quickly, but it adds a little texture, I think.
You have some interesting ground covers too, like your creeping Jenny,
Yes.
and there's some sedum. Right here's the creeping Jenny. And if you take a view of that over there, just to get a picture of the whole thing, is just beautiful.
Actually, there are columbine straight ahead, and they were here when we got here, but we planted the bushes, of course, and the junipers. So they've really grown quite well in 6 years. And then more red here with the moss rose.
And yellow in the pot.
You can tell I like red.
I do too.
I started on on your left there by the garage door, I started those cannas inside so they would be up, and I tried to have them blooming by the time the tour was going to begin.
The balloon flower on the end, did we talk about that?
No, that was planted last year, and it's done really well. It's kind of a soft,
Really soft.
light pink.
Really soft pink.
And of course, more red with the begonia and the red lily, and more coneflowers on the right. I call this my little corridor. It's very peaceful here for me.
And there's your red bench.
And my red bench and my red pot.
And we should say something about these trees over on the right. These are fruit trees.
Yes.
Well, all along here we have
Except
fruit
for this one right here to your right is not a fruit tree, and I'm not remembering the name of it. But I'll tell you a little story about the peach trees. We planted them by seed. There are 3 here, and they came from my parents' orchard, and so these have all grown in 6 years.
And you have a crop from them, a harvest?
We did. We had lots of peaches last year, but then with the frost, the late frost this year, we don't have any.
Okay, over here on the left, is there anything you'd like to point out here? This is a nice
Yes.
shady area.
This is my blue garden. However, there are no blue blossoms because they've all bloomed earlier. Sage.
And I see Russian sage, it looks like.
Right.
Back here with the blue blossoms.
Yes. Over to your right is sort of my lily garden. I've got red and orange in there. Of course, the hostas. And again, this was all grass when we moved here. The red hibiscus, we have several, but more red. I've planted bee balm back in there, which I love because it brings the pollinator.
What is growing on your fence? Back there?
That's grapes. Yep.
Compost bin?
I have learned what not to put in there.
Okay.
So I've emptied it and have been putting in things that,
Are more appropriate.
yes.
What are some things you put in there? Maybe
Well,
Those
I
that
was
I can-
putting in kind of some branches, and of course that doesn't work very well. So now I just put
things that break down.
that
easy.
break down easily. Watching the weeds or whatever that are very invasive not to put in there, so they can grow again another year.
You have a
That agave plant, which has to be brought in every winter, which is kind of a heavy load, but I like it. We laid the Colorado flagstone, which we got in Colorado, and again, all these trees we planted, with the exception of the corked screw willow. I've got a grapefruit, right,
Okay.
tucked in there, and I planted that 27 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
And of course, I have to bring that in the winter also, but it's not doing as well this summer as it has. So, to your left here is wild strawberries, actually, and I'm kind of really proud of that because it reminds me, I transplanted it from our pasture where my parents lived, and so I just kind of made it meandering. And
Do they bear fruit?
they bear fruit, but I think the birds get them before
Before you.
and they're teeny tiny but very sweet. And this tree, this was a time of learning. Last year it was very light green, and we discovered it was low in iron.
Iron, yes.
And
Had iron chlorosis is what it's called.
Okay, and so then my husband put holes around the perimeter of the tree and put the granules of iron in the ground. We've done that twice.
At this point, I'd like to point out that our educational focus for Angie's garden is iron chlorosis. When we visited her garden several years ago, this tree, this birch tree, had very yellow leaves, and we knew it was suffering from iron chlorosis. And so which is very common in Salina and in Kansas, especially with birch trees like this. The handout that we prepared is entitled Iron Chlorosis on Trees, and we encourage you to visit our website at centralkansas.ksu.edu for resources to learn more about iron chlorosis. It is looking very healthy now. It's a nice green,
yes.
since they've treated it with the iron around the perimeter, and looks very healthy.
I might point out too, we have the northeastern Kansas glacier rock up where my parents live, and so we hauled a lot of those rock, and they're interspersed throughout the garden.
Milkweed is a favorite. In fact, it's a specific flower for the monarchs.
Monarch, yeah.
They only like milkweed, and so whenever we do that, we are being very friendly to the environment with our monarchs.
We have 3 of these mock orange in our yard, and my husband started it from a slip, just a little twig actually, and they've done really quite well, and they smell great. And that wood is brought from Colorado. And this is our Colorado flagstone.
And this is where we get into real meandering, because this is a whole other garden over here that is spectacular, with driftwood and sculpture and iron pieces, lots of variety of plants.
This piece of wood to your left came from behind our cabin in Colorado. It was scorched by fire, and it's actually half of a piece of the tree. You'll see the other later, but so they had to cut it in half to bring it down the mountain.
Oh, that gets in there.
the black-eyed Susans to your left. And they grow and spread very fast. More.
I see some peony plants here
Yes.
that have already bloomed.
And some of these came from my mother-in-law's garden, and some came from my mom's garden. The bear came from my father-in-law. It was at his home before he passed. And so we just kind of thought we needed to put him by a pine tree, which reminds us of Colorado.
On the original garden tour, on the original garden tour before we had to go virtual, we had a scavenger hunt in each yard, and this was going to be the treasure for this yard to find this, and it's pretty well hidden back here in the corner. So we've already deadheaded that. And I also want to point out this dark leaf crepe myrtle back here. That is, that's beautiful. It looks like it's a newer plant.
It is.
It's interesting because of the dark colors.
Right.
I like it. So.
And we had to take out a peach tree here where the red crepe myrtle is. And so we thought, well, this would get tall and fill up some space and add a little more depth.
And here's a pretty hibiscus here that's has its pretty flowers going.
A challenge now is when the trees were small, we had more sunlight. Now as they get larger, I'm having to look more for shaded plants. This is the other half of the burnt tree that we brought down from the mountain. And it was black when we first got it. But
So how did you do anything to it, or is it just
the sun has bleached
the
it.
sun has just bleached it? Angie, do you have any gardening tips from all these beautiful things you have here?
Gardening tips. Well, I'm one that likes to dig up plants wherever I go. I do have a rose that came from a ditch where my parents live, and it was very difficult to get it to grow. But I try to incorporate anywhere I see something pretty, I bring it to my garden. And sometimes they don't make it, but. And just a little side here, we had a schnauzer. He died 2 years ago now. We had him for 14 years, and that's sort of his little garden. And he would, every morning, he would get on the bricks and he'd go and he'd do the trail all around the yard.
That was his path.
Mm-hmm.
As you look back in there, I see the central part here especially is more shaded.
Right.
And so those plants will will require more shade, and then on this end we're coming to, we see a lot more sun.
Right. And more of my hostas in the sun.
Those might have to go into that shade.
Yeah, they might,
garden.
yeah. We do have a cherry tree to the right. It didn't produce this year, but because of the late frost, but part of our little orchard, an extension of me, and it's a place of solitude and quiet and place for me to meditate and to focus, and so it's really been a beautiful thing to be involved with.